area, and while it may not be strange to do that, the things given or purchased in this Bumblebee video will be, because it's all about the top 10 unusual things spoiled kings bought. So the first one is 800 dogs. That's it. That's it. This man right here, 800 dogs. Why? Maybe he want to star in his own remake of Air Buddy franchise, but with a Bollywood twist. I'm not sure. I'm not him. I don't know. And who is he? The Maharaja of Junagadh, Muhammad Mahabat Khan III. Now that is a name. Alright, so that title in Sanskrit means great ruler, but I think last ruler is a little bit more accurate because that's exactly what Muhammad was before his negligence in decision making during the Indian independence of August 1947 put him out of job. He screws up spectacularly, chooses that Junagadh should accede to Pakistan, and quite literally gets ran the hell out of Junagadh by Indian government. He lives out the rest of his life in exile, but enough about the man, let's hear about the dog. So, as mentioned, 800 is a real guaranteed number, but varying accounts actually say he may have owned as many as 2,000 dogs in one time period. Each dog had its own personal room in the palace, fitted with furnishings, their own servant, and of course phones, so that the dogs can call each other. I don't know. Dog died, state of mourning's declared. 2 dogs bang one out, now there's a new litter of puppies. Gotta make sure they're married, so it's not bastard puppies. This man reportedly spent 20 lakh, aka 2 million, on a dog wedding and proclaimed it a state holiday. He's done the same for their birthdays as well. This next story can be abbreviated simply to the PPVRM. What's that stand for? Pepe, the Pygmy, and the Very Rich Man. Harkov was one of history's earliest explorers, 4,000 years ago in the 23rd century BC. He made his living wandering out into uncharted lands. But on his 4th expedition into the unknown, the pharaoh's scribe had messaged him to drop everything and return at once. Harkov had sent a letter to the king some time ago describing a friendly pygmy clan Harkov had encountered. The pharaoh at the time, Pepe II, who was an 8-year-old nightmare child, who'd you know, happened to be obsessed with pygmies, and quickly wrote back. You said in this letter of yours that you have brought a pygmy of divine dances from the land of the horizon dwellers. Hurry and bring that pygmy you have brought alive, happy and well, for the divine dances to gladden the heart, to delight the heart of the king. Such was life under the rule of an 8-year-old, so Harkov returned to Egypt, pygmy in tow. But all of the letters from the pharaohs, this letter from Pepe meant a great deal to Harkov. He literally had it engraved on the walls of his tomb. This was a dude who discovered the lands around Egypt far and wide, served many pharaohs, and even single-handedly talked a kingdom out of war. So why so gassed over delivering a petite person to a child? Pepe loaded Harkov up, that's why. Homeboy spent the rest of his life as an incredibly wealthy and powerful man through that payment. After a lifetime of discovering distant kingdoms, opening trade routes, and bringing back exotic discoveries, Harkov finally made his fortune just by entertaining a child. I would've been grinning ear to ear too, dude. This story is a Bumblebee classic because this king is a pure kook. Next up is a literal Disney castle. What Ludwig II really loved was castles. Sure, he already had a bunch, but he wanted more, and he wanted them to look like they just came out of fairy tale pop-up books. So much so, he didn't actually hire real architects. On more than one occasion, castles were literally designed by an opera set designer, ripping Ludwig off for being such a nitwit fanboy. One was supposed to be a replica of Versailles, another was a weird combination of styles, and one was set up atop a mountain. Neuschwanstein. Ludwig's most expensive project that's drained the Bavarian government's banks into the negatives. This castle is unbelievable though. Ludwig probably would have been thrilled to learn his fairy tale goal was achieved, as the castle became the basis for Sleeping Beauty's castle in the Disneyland parks and the inspiration for the castle in Disney's 1950 Cinderella movie. However, foreign banks threatened to seize this property in 1885, but he refused. In retaliation, the government doctored medical documents that would declare him insane and forced his removal from the throne. The private king was then found dead just weeks after moving into said new castle in 1886, floating inexplicably in the lake. Homeboy is barely cold and in the ground before the government starts trying to make a profit off of the debt-incurring castle. 7 weeks following Ludwig's mysterious death, Neuschwanstein is open to the public and remains one of the most visited castles in Germany and one of the most popular tourist and luxury hotel destinations in Europe. This next king's heir anthem must have been Avril Lavigne's Here's to Never growing up. King Farouk, the last king of Egypt, was so immature his mother hoped that becoming king would help him grow up. Obviously it didn't, because country rule and wealth aren't something you give immature people if you want them to change. It just gives the dude arrested development and a whole lot of power. His reign was dominated by corruption scandals, his people were impoverished, and his court was brimming with wealth. So the Egyptian army eventually intervened, driving him out in 1952. Then the process of clearing out his possessions began. Thousands of silk shirts, an entire fleet of Cadillacs, 50 diamond-studded golden walking sticks. Farouk collected an absurd amount of French Baroque-style furniture, and his coin collection was one of the grandest in the world, consisting of over 8,500 coins, some of which, like the 1993 $20 gold double eagle, and all 5 known examples of the 1913 Liberty head nickel, would be worth millions today, and they were then too. He once decided he wasn't a fan of the railway station he used twice a year and had the old one demolished and built a new one for millions of dollars. And what was most shocking to people at the time was his extensive adult entertainment collection. At the time, the largest adult entertainment collection in the world, worth over $1 million. Picture like when Russell Peters was on MTV Cribs and he opened that dresser drawer and inside all the DVDs had to be pixelated. It was essentially that moment, except Russell Peters actively volunteered and made fun of his collection, while Farouk, when confronted with it, happily admitted to owning it but was shocked by the lewd accusations, insisting they're just classical works of art to look at and be appreciated. This next king didn't have to buy anything, he turned the money itself into big old jars. Whew, name brace moment, okay. Maharaja Sawai Madho Singh II is the former king of Jaipur, and also the only one who's been entered into the Guinness Book of World Records. He was on his way to attend the coronation of Edward VII in 1902 and intended to bring Ganjagal holy water. When toying in what to bring it in, all the options on the market were very Macy's, and Singh, he was more of a Gucci guy. So he finds 2 very reputable silversmiths in the mystery Khana and gave them 14,000 Jaipur silver rupees, which were issued from the Kaptadara treasury of Jaipur state in 1894. These coins are then melted into sheets and shaped as the jars. No shouldering was done. So the results are 2 enormous sterling silver vessels, the largest silver objects in the world, per Guinness World Records. These Ganjalis are still presented at the Maharaja Sawai Man Singh II Museum and are a huge attraction amongst visitors. Next up is a title that needs no explanation, the Pew Procurer. Yeah, there's always that one creep. This one also happens to be voted England's worst king by a large chunk of the historian community. Says a lot, seeing as his dad was the nutcase who lost America, but maybe we're just throwing stones here. If you haven't guessed already, I'm talking about George IV, notorious for 2 things, banging and blowing the budget, which started to go hand in hand after a while. On a very short list of decent things you can say about the dude, it's actually unlikely he ever forced himself on someone without consent, which, don't get me wrong, I'm not patting him on the back, that's setting the bar pretty low, but I mean, when a woman refused his advances, the series of events following would be the first 5 stages of grief, then begging, then a tantrum, potentially more begging, sometimes threatening to take his own life in a very dramatic fashion, and then if nothing's worked, offer up money and jewels. Didn't matter if you're a working girl or a potential princess, he's willing to pay up the dough for, you know. Amazingly, despite not being a catch in any way and inflating to the size of the aunt in Harry Potter who floats away, women still agreed to have sweaty time with him, and they say money can't buy happiness. Sure did for Georgie. And P.S. when he died, his brothers found 7,000 envelopes, each with a lock of hair in it, which wasn't always from his mistress's heads, if you know what I mean. Because I love my subtle hints, or even not so subtle, our next is I'm a big fan. Frederick William I, King of Prussia, a tiny man with a big collection. Tall dudes. Maybe he was trying to make up for the fact he was only 5'5", but being 5'2" myself, I can't really see the appeal of walking around next to a flock of people I have to crane my head to look at constantly. So, whatever the reason, he would do absolutely anything to get more tall men, such as buy tall young men from their own custody. Just walk up to everyday dudes on the street, I want to buy you. Apparently he even kidnapped some. Other countries would try and get in his good books by sending tall guys as presents. Babies that came out larger than normal are marked with a red scarf to indicate their future recruits. If there weren't enough tall babies, let's round up the bastards basketball and volleyball players, and hop to it, guys. Frederick William literally performed a kind of eugenics, pouring money into making tall people bang in the hopes of producing a tall kid. He didn't like them just to look up at, though. He was creating his own special army regiment known as the Potsdam Giants. The only requirement to be in this group is he had to be over 6 foot, but most of the cases the men were taller than that. Being huge had its advantages because the taller you were, the more you got paid. So what was the point of this very expensive, fashionable armed regiment? Not to go to war, just to cheer up the king. He poured thousands into these men and treated them like they're his favorite toys. He would have them paraded in front of him, sometimes in his own bedroom when he was sick in bed. Next up is the Lick It and Stick It King. So, the Queen and Prince William are said to be passionate bingo players, and Her Royal Highness used to enjoy drama novels, horse racing, and at her Scottish residence she'd host Scottish dances. Her grandfather George, though, his main hobby was stamp collecting. Starting as a young prince, he continued his collection into the time as a monarch, even through the chaos of World War I. What's unusual about George's hobby was how many stamps he collected over his lifetime. 328 albums of 60 pages each. So that's nearly 20,000 pages of stamps. His passion earned him the nickname the King of Philately, which is the proper name for stamp collecting, and I can't tell if I'm saying it right, as literally nobody would know because this may truly be one of the most vacant-brained hobbies imaginable. Anyways, George becomes like a celebrity to other stamp collectors, and he's elected the vice president of their Royal Society of London Stamp Collecting Club in 1893. So in 1905, while he's still a prince, he set the new record for the most amount spent on a stamp. Roughly $220,000 US today. A quarter year later, knowing the prince was an active part of the stamp community, asked if he'd heard that some damned fool had paid as much as over 1,400 pounds for one stamp. The prince got that sick moment of getting to turn around and say, yes, I was that damned fool. This one king bought so much dumb crap, it's essentially a grocery list of the obscene. So, Henry VIII, the one who smokes his wives and was full of aggression. We recently did a video on him called the Top 10 King Henry VIII Facts You Never Knew. So, if you're interested in learning more after what I tell you about what he hoarded, maybe go check that out. So, what are some of the things on Henry's stupid purchase list? Purple bagpipes. Although he didn't write Greensleeves, Henry was nevertheless a talented musician and composer and was able to spend a few £1,000s on that bad boy. A personal favorite that I learned was probably the bowling alley. Built after the birth of his son Edward in 1537, this massive expenditure was almost 200 feet long, and it was more than 3 times the length of a modern 10-pin bowling alley. Records show in 1526, Henry commissioned a pair of leather football boots that cost 4 shillings. Nowadays, that's a couple thousand. Hilariously, 14 years later in 1540, he banned football. You know what you should spend taxpayer dollars on? A codpiece so big you can hide a weapon in it. Henry is credited with popularizing the peculiar Tudor fashion for the enormous exaggerated codpieces, which during his reign established themselves as symbols of a man's virility and masculinity. The king, of course, had to have the biggest codpiece of all, and towards the end of his life, Henry's codpieces became so roomy, he could literally have glorified pockets and keep jewels and other valuables and even small weapons in there. Last but not least is 2 kings and a rager. In 1509, Henry VIII, England's most famous monarchs, ascended to the throne, ensuring the Tudor succession after his father. After almost a decade of rule, the young king agreed to follow the advice of close advisor Cardinal Wolsey and try to improve England's relations with the continent. After Wolsey's efforts in 1518, the Treaty of London was signed as a non-aggression pact between the major Christian, very important detail, European powers at the time. One of the most important countries for England to make peace with was France, as the two had been beefing intermittently for literal centuries. The French king, Francis I, was only 3 years younger than Henry, and both men had been hailed in their countries as great Renaissance princes. Naturally, these two dudes are gonna be curious about what each other's like, and they want to meet. And for two dudes who are young and rich, what better way to meet than throw in a rager? A date is set for June of 1520, and what would follow is probably one of the greatest parties ever held. The meeting was an excuse for both Henry and Francis to show off their wealth of their kingdoms, and by proxy, their power. So the Field of the Cloth of Gold occurred on the 7th to 24th of June, 1520, named after the gold material used for all the tents, all the costumes, and the decorations at the time, and it was 2 weeks of games, feasts, tournaments, and balls that cost the equivalent of no less than $20 million today between France and England. Between the 7th and the 24th, around 12,000 members of royal houses, nobles, guests, and servants gathered in the fields of northern France to spend dreamy days and nights in temporary palaces built of brick, timber, cloth, and glass. Guests enjoyed delicacies made from 29,000 fish, 98,000 eggs, 6,400 275 birds, 2,200 sheep, and endless glasses of wine. Whilst the celebrations were a success, in reality it did actually little to improve the relation between England and France, and within a few years the countries were at war once again. Alright, thank you so much for tuning in to Bumblebee, so great seeing you. Be sure to like and subscribe if you want to see more from us, and until next time, if you could have any of the ridiculous things on this list, what would it be?